The desire to get something for nothing is demonic. The desire to give something that costs you everything is divine. Literally, as a Christian, like the example left by our Lord is someone who leaves heaven in a way that inconveniences him completely. It costs him everything. He has to give up. He actually has to give up something of more value than any life that's ever existed.
You're listening to the Great Reassessment Podcast.
Welcome, Jordan Bush. Thanks for being here today, man.
Hey, brother. Man, good to be here.
All right. This was not on the agenda today, but I noticed you're drinking a spindrift, and I want you to tell me what flavor it is and what's your favorite spindrift flavor.
Ooh, this is a topic I've been waiting to talk about. I do love spindrifts. Just real fruit juice, and then just the carbonated water and stuff. The blood oranges are pretty good. Blood orange tangerine. I do tend to favor the ones that have lime and lemon. Like the one where it's like lemonade with something. There is one other one. It's like a fruit punch one that has like some passion fruit in it. That one's really good.
My brother just told me about, I think it's new, and he said that's his new favorite one.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Again, I really do like the blood orange is a good one. I'm sure there's another one.
I have the Nojito.
I was just gonna mention that one. Yeah. So that one, it's like mint and lime.
Yeah.
Conceptually, I love mint and lime together, but this actual execution, it's fine. It's nothing to write home about. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
You know?
Maybe we can all agree that the grapefruit one is not the best.
I don't even know if I've had the grapefruit one. I guess the other one that I kind of do like is I haven't had it much is the pineapple one. It just kind of tastes like it kind of tastes like pineapple water. It's just nothing crazy, but it's got a good little taste, and yeah, I like it.
Yeah, there's been a big resurgence in food that is free from dyes,
Yes,
and artificial sweeteners, and synthetic ingredients that are lab grown and things like that. So it's cool. One of my favorite chips that has recently come out is called Boulder Canyon. Have you tried the Boulder Canyon chips?
Of course I have. Yes, Boulder Canyon with avocado oil, and then there's the Siete chips. Those are also avocado oil and like small family. Until recently, they just sold the company for a couple $2 billion, I think. But yeah, I love just looking for stuff that has better ingredients and not a bunch of garbage.
Yeah, not necessarily healthy. I'm not going to say potato chips are healthy, but you feel a little less guilt when you're eating them. So
yeah, definitely. And like that, I really do like the taste of both of those as well. But yeah.
Well, cool. And I'm so excited to chat with you. We, just for several reasons, we're both Christians, and I love everything you're doing in that realm. We're both Bitcoiners.
Yep.
And we both have ties to South America.
Yeah.
So, I hope to sort of riff on all of that a little bit. But you are the founder of Thank God for Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I would like to, if you could just explain a little bit what Thank God for Bitcoin is. Thank God for Bitcoin. And what is it that you do?
It's a great question. So basically, the Cliff Notes version is that I was a pastor and church planting missionary of a small church in Uruguay, Montevideo, Uruguay, right across the river from where you guys are from, and moved there with my family in 2015. We ended up helping. The church had already been, planted by some of our teammates, and so by the time we got there, the church had been in existence for a little over a year. And then we got there and just started learning Spanish and started ministering to folks, and you just really enjoyed it. And then about 4 years after we arrived, or no, I guess it was a little over. Almost 3 when I first bought Bitcoin. So late 2017, I bought like $100 worth of Bitcoin. And then became the pastor of the church through a whole set of circumstances, and so just everything else went by the wayside. And then in early 2019, Bitcoin kind of came back to life after crashing, and so I just looked at it and was like, "What is this thing? I just don't understand what this is or why it's just the price is gyrating around, and it just seems to be no rhyme or reason." And so I just took. By that point I had my feet under me a little bit more. And so I just started to try to understand Bitcoin and started studying it in some of my free time. And, over the course of, 4 or 5 months, I just started finding that a lot of like this, that it was more than just money. Like the reasons why it existed and why it was created, became really interesting to me. And the really one of the kind of pivotal points that I just was not expecting at all was just the realization that Bitcoin was created to be a money that a government couldn't hyperinflate. It was created in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And the reason why that mattered to me was because half of our church members in Uruguay were Venezuelan immigrants. And so these were people who had their currency vaporized basically by their government printing, endless amounts of units, paper currency units. And so it really just hit me. It was like, holy cow, Bitcoin is created to be something that would keep, my friends and, these people who we love and have become friends with from having to endure what they're all having to endure. And so we just saw the human consequences of what currency devaluation does. So some of our friends, they were doctors, economists. One of them like basically sold Herbalife products, and he was making over $100,000 a year a couple years prior, and then a couple years later, once the currency failed, like they didn't even they couldn't. They were struggling to pay a couple $100s, a few $100s a month rent. And so just to see that change and see how fast that happened. The other thing we saw was there were families that got separated because of that. So you had, the money's worthless, so nobody can afford anything. And so in many cases, the reason why so many people were showing up in Uruguay was because they were trying to get a job and then send money home. And then either go back home if something changed on the ground in their situations in the country, or bring their family to be with them. And in many cases, they were thinking that would take, 6 months or a year. And in many cases, it ended up taking them 2, 3, 4 years. And so just imagine you've got a family, you got a father growing up away from his wife and kids, you've got kids growing up without their dad. It's just an atrocious situation. And so the more that I learned about it and the more that I learned about just the problem that it was created to solve, the more I just started to see and just really appreciate just the cost on a whole host of fronts that aren't immediately intuitive, including just the cost of ministry. There were, in our case, there were a number of churches that had been planted 40, 50 years ago that were still very weak in Uruguay in terms of still renting a small building. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the currency in Uruguay and many other places around the world has failed 3 to 4 times since the U.S. went off the gold standard in 1971. And so this just decimates, the gospel ministry because, you imagine you're a church and your church is growing and people are being very generous. And so they keep giving and you're saving up to buy a building and you're, saving up to hire another pastor. And then imagine that you do this for 3 or 4 years and you're just on the verge of being able to afford a building, and then the currency collapses. And all of that money, if you're holding the local currency, it becomes worthless. And so it absolutely steals from and decimates and it takes advantage of the sacrificial giving and the self-denial that these people in the church have exercised. And so it's horribly unjust and wrong. And so, yeah, the more that I understood it, the more of an evil I saw it to be, not just something that wasn't ideal, but this is actually immoral and a threat to just normal people's lives and, a threat to gospel ministry by virtue of, having the currency not go as far and people have less bandwidth to even be ministered to, which is a whole nother conversation. So I really do think this is a big deal that a lot of people just don't appreciate the full scope of the danger.
Yeah, it's really disheartening to see a population of people just so desperate. And
Yep.
Yeah, it's really hard to see that. Did you see any Venezuelans who made it to Uruguay with Bitcoin? I bet there wasn't that many, but were there any?
Yeah, no, there weren't any that I knew of that came to Uruguay with Bitcoin. When they were coming, it was late 2014, early 2015, and so Bitcoin it hadn't even gone to 20,000. That kind of grabbed a lot of people's attention, and so by the time that I got into it, really in early 2019, there were some Venezuelan people who I knew who were into different cryptos, including a bunch of scams. There was one called OneCoin, which is like one of the most notorious scams. They stole I think a couple $1 billion. And so this guy was caught up in some of that. But yeah, I mean, again, in hindsight, like I found out, there's guys like Crypto Bastardo, who's a Venezuelan guy, and he's into Bitcoin, and yeah, just a bunch of other people who, again, it was like a whole Wild West world. So there were people trying to figure it out and trying to, understand how it works and how to differentiate, or like just how to think about Bitcoin relative to other cryptocurrencies. It really is not an intuitive and not an easy path to navigate. And so, yeah, when I was getting into it, there wasn't anybody that I knew of who's using it.
It's so hard to learn by yourself too. The first time I ever heard the
Yeah.
word Bitcoin, this was when like Facebook videos really were became a thing. There was this guy going around a college campus interviewing students about socialism and things like that, and he mentioned the word Bitcoin, and I think it was during the 2014 World Cup. That's like the time marker that I'm associating this with, and I remember just going and Googling Bitcoin, but I gave up after like 5 minutes because it's so hard to understand if you're just lone wolfing it, and it's so much easier if you can just have somebody who has a little bit of experience explain to you why this is important and what the underlying principles are, and what money is. And so it's not easy just to, I would like to talk to anybody who just not having a tech background. How did you understand Bitcoin if you were arrived at it completely without any help? That would be interesting. Well, that's really cool, man. That's really sweet that you had that experience in Uruguay. What did your wife think about going to Uruguay before you guys had decided to do that? Like, were you thinking about other countries to go serve in? And explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so my wife and I met in Bible college, and so when we met, we, long story short, the first year, I guess our only year of Bible college together, halfway through the year, the school that we were at did a missions conference. And so at that point, like I wasn't seriously thinking about missions, just because I just thought to myself, again, I couldn't have articulated to you, but my thought was, well, I'm not a missionary. Like I'm a basketball player. Like I'm like I don't like swinging from vines or, living in tree houses. Like I'm not like an outdoorsman or whatever. And so that was the conception that I had of missionaries. And so when they did this missions conference, there were probably 30 different missionaries from different boards there and stuff. And so they just were talking about all the different things that were going on and all the needs that were, that existed around the world. And the last guy who spoke was this guy named Nard Pugyao, who grew up in the Philippines in a jungle tribe. His grandparents were headhunters. And so he just told the story of his life, which is just absolutely bonkers. There was a guy who had gone to the camp that was put on by the same organization that put on the Bible college that we were at. They did like a Christian summer camp, and this guy, I think his name was Dick Grote, I believe, he had just basically surrendered his life to be a missionary when he was, I think, 12 years old at this summer camp, and then just ended up following through, became a missionary, and moved to the Philippines to try to share the gospel with these people who were, in this far-flung tribe. And so he went in there and found out that there had been at least 2 other attempts to move into this tribe and tell them about Jesus, and they had chased these people off. They'd like threatened them. And so he ended up being the 3rd guy. And so he gets there, wants to tell them about Jesus, tells them he's got a more important message than anything they've ever heard. And so for whatever reason, they didn't chase him off. And so they let him move in there. And over the course of a number of years, he learns their own language. He teaches them to read and write their own language. He translates the scriptures into their language, and then shares the gospel with them. The vast majority of people in this tribe, basically tribe of people, believe in Jesus. And so Nard, this is all happening while Nard is a young kid. So he grows up, and like his life is just radically different. Everyone around him, their life is just turned upside down by Jesus. And so by the time he's 18, they've had 18 years worth of Christian culture, or like 15, 16 years worth of Christian culture. And so long story short, he ends up, through Dick and through some other people, somebody was willing to pay for Nard to go to the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, to get his degree. So imagine this guy grows up in a jungle tribe and ends up going to get a normal college degree in Chicago, downtown Chicago. The whole thing was nuts. And so he just shared about how, long story short, he ended up, Nard, when he grew up, he ended up getting his degree in jungle aviation and ended up flying back in the first shipment of Bibles in his people's own language back into them. And so as he's sharing the story, he's talking about how he's flying over these mountains towards, his hamlet or wherever they lived. And it just, like, the reality and like the perspective of his life just kind of just floored him. And he just was saying, like, man, like, if it wasn't for this guy, this random guy deciding against all evidence, that he should spend his life to go and share the gospel with these people who could, very well kill him. He's like, I just wouldn't be here. And in the lives of myself and everybody else who I've ever known, they would be so radically different. And so he shared this, and then he gets to the kind of climax of his presentation and basically said, this is in early 2007, I think. He basically said there are still at that point 6,500 languages that have no scripture translated to them. And so I'm sitting there in the front row off to the left, and he had the old printer paper where it's like connected on the ends, like dot matrix style or whatever. And so he takes, the first page, it's got a full list of all these languages. He throws the first page off of the podium, and it grabs the second page and grabs the third page. And there's like 9 pages total. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like doubled over, just kind of like looking over at him like this. And I just remember thinking, like, well, Lord, I don't know if I'm a missionary or not, but like, if that's real, like if there really are, just millions and millions of people who have no access to the gospel, like, well, please let me go then. Like, I want to go. Like, please let me go. And so my wife and I, who we weren't dating, the Lord was doing something similar in her heart. She was sitting on like the other side of the auditorium and just basically said something similar. She did not grow up in a Christian home. And so a lot of this stuff was totally new to her. And so by the time we graduated and I graduated graduated college, and we ended up getting married, we knew that missions was something we wanted to pursue, being missionary and sharing the gospel, specifically thinking about a place that's more, more jungle-ish. It was something that we had in mind. And then we got married. We were married for about a year, had our first kid, and we're just thinking about, being missionaries. We wanted to be missionaries, but we're thinking, hey, we've got this little kid. Like, we just were like, nobody moves with a little kid into the jungle. Like a lot of these places, there's high rate of disease and all kinds of stuff. And so we just were like, I don't know if we're ready for that yet. And so we just kind of started to look into other opportunities that were available on the missions front. And so one of our really good friends just basically said, that they got appointed to go plant a church in Uruguay. They asked us to consider going with them as part of their team. And so that's what we did. And so from the beginning, like my wife and I, that was part of our story. And I mean, my wife, when we came back from Uruguay, it was really hard. And so cause my wife would go back tomorrow, she would, just really just the people you're ministering to and just having like a pretty unified life in a lot of ways where, our kids didn't really have like a church culture. It wasn't, there wasn't like a lot of these like secondhand traditions that have been passed down, like all these extra stuff that gets added on to just the gospel. We were in a culture that really wasn't a big fan of Christianity. There was a very small percentage of Christians. And so for the people who were coming and were actually involved in church, it really was costing them something. They were there because they wanted to be. There was nobody being forced to come, and so there was just a whole host of reasons why why that context is just a super beautiful context. So long-winded answer of just basically like my wife loves missions, and we'll see what the future holds. We're open to doing something like that in the future.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I heard you say Moody Bible Institute. Is that where you guys both were?
No. So we were at something, it was called the Word of Life Bible Institute. It's about an hour north of Tampa, Florida. And so my wife grew up in Tampa. I lived part of my life north of Tampa. And so, yeah, that's where we met.
Got it. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with missionary pilots. In Spokane, there's the Moody Aviation. And so we have a lot of students who are training right now to be missionary pilots in our church. And yeah, a lot of them have really cool stories about how they grew up.
Yep. Yeah. There's a ton of, I think I've got at least one buddy who went through there. guy's name is Evan Garrett. But he went through there, and we went to the same Bible college, and he's just a great dude. I think he's out in the field now. He's flying around somewhere, and shipping missionaries in to help them share the gospel.
Yeah, that's cool. So thank God for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What are you up to now with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, the connection is we were in Uruguay. I got into Bitcoin, started to see the connection between all these things. And then just for a number of reasons, like we hadn't taken a furlough in like almost the 6-7 years that we were in Uruguay. And so we were like, hey, we need to at least come back for probably at least a year of furlough. There's been churches that have been supporting us for like 10 years that we hadn't seen. And so we like came back for that. And then there was like some doctrinal stuff too, like just shifting doctrinal convictions. We helped plan a Reformed Baptist church, and then we were, specifically me, like we're having more like Presbyterian sympathies. And so, I'm just like thinking about that too. And there's just like, I don't know. And then on top of that, just because of being in Bitcoin and seeing the consequences and the way that, all of these things affect churches and other nonprofit organizations, there was a big part of me as well that just had the desire to help Christians understand these things. And so the first kind of step down that path was I ended up getting like supernaturally connected to this group of people who were Christians, who were into Bitcoin, and who were interested in, I've later found out, writing a book that basically would help explain the Christian case for Bitcoin. Hey, there it is. And so long story short, ended up getting involved with that. And we ended up over the course of about 6 months writing the book. And so the book came out early 21. We left Uruguay at the end of 21. And so I just was interested in trying to, I had no comprehension for what that would look like. But just the Lord opened up the door to kind of start a business that would, that would basically help share the gospel, help share the gospel of Bitcoin. No, basically help explain Bitcoin to a lot of people who are so focused on the very good and necessary work that they're doing that they a lot of times don't, a lot of this kind of stuff, the monetary side of things, the economic factors, all these kinds of things, some of this just goes over their head. And so they just get, preyed upon and have to endure the consequences of other people thinking about these things and making decisions without their knowledge. And so we ended up founding TGFB as a for-profit business in 2022. Let's see, it was like July 2022. And then so for the last 3 years, we've just been doing a combination of things between publishing other books, doing a conference basically at least once a year, and other smaller events like that, where we just provide opportunities for Christians who are into Bitcoin or desiring to know more about Bitcoin to kind of get together with people who have a better grasp of it and ask questions and bring in all kinds of speakers and doing that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we do. We're like, it's like an interesting time to be it's an interesting time to be running a for-profit business, just because like once you get into Bitcoin, you look at a lot of these things, and there's something within investing in economic circles called the hurdle rate. And so when you start denominating your like Bitcoin, denominating your rate of success in Bitcoin, you're at the point where, with very few exceptions, almost no business that you're running is going to be able to outpace Bitcoin, just the rate of return that Bitcoin is giving you. And so we've gotten to do a lot of different things. So for instance, one of the things that we did is we left the vast majority of our money, the money that like our startup capital, we left the vast majority of it in Bitcoin. And then we just sell some as we need to. And so that has tremendously extended our runway as a business to just like staggering degrees. I mean, we would have had to raise more money and do different things, but having, storing a lot of our money in Bitcoin has enabled us to go longer, not being profitable at this point. And so we're still like working through all that and just trying to figure out what that looks like and, like what the best approach is. But again, it's just been cool to be able to test out some of our own theories and get to see, these what would seem absolutely insane to a lot of people, has just proven out to be the smartest thing that we could have done.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly appreciated a lot of the content you guys create, the I don't want to say message, but just how you help explain money, Bitcoin to people who are Christians,
Yep.
because money in the church among Christians for so long has just been something that either it's like this denying yourself. It's sort of like reminiscent of asceticism a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, oh, you don't want to talk about money because that's bad, or the only reason you make money is so that you can just give it to this type of organization,
Yep.
and making people feel guilty for. And I'm not I don't want to paint everybody that way, but that's just
Yeah.
sort of my experience with churches. Um, Growing up, that's just sort of been the attitude towards money. One thing in Thank God for Bitcoin, which really enjoyed it, I like that you can sort of read it not in order, I
Yeah.
guess you could
Yep.
say, and is this idea of, um, so for anybody out there, so ex nihilo, which means out of nothing, God creates out of nothing. He created the universe out of nothing. That's part of what makes him God. He has the power to do that. And so when you talk about fiat currency and governments creating government money that's not backed by anything, they are sort of doing that, attempting to do that same thing, circumventing this natural order of, humans cannot create out of nothing. And so could you elaborate a little bit on God creating ex nihilo and as it relates to money?
Yeah. And again, if this is a weird framing for people, like, it really shouldn't be that weird, because even independent of this specific application of that idea, like, the temptation for people from the beginning has been whether or not they're going to submit to the laws and the things that God has laid out and given them to do, or if they're going to try to set those aside and do their own thing and establish their own authority, on their own authority, kind of do whatever they want in the world. And so again, this is Adam and Eve, literally the first pages of the Bible. God tells them not to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they do it anyhow. And in so doing, rather than, they're either going to trust and obey God's word, or in their case, they're either going to trust and obey the word of the serpent, who we later come to find out is Satan. And so in so doing, basically, in trusting, we obviously know the story, they trust and obey Satan, and in so doing, they think that they're kind of taking their own authority. They're thinking, oh, I've been liberated to make this decision on my own. And in reality, what they're doing is they're just making themselves slaves, slaves to Satan. You're slave to the one whom you obey. And so they obeyed his evaluation of what was actually going on in the garden, and evaluation of what God had told them. And so this same thing is true of all of us as individuals, but then even on different levels. So this is true of governments. You see in Psalm 2, you hear like the psalmist, just basically asking, why do the nations rage, and why do the peoples plot in vain against the Lord and against his anointed? And so you see this same temptation is true of governments. Governments are always tempted with, faced with this decision, are we going to submit to God's design for how, in describing the limits of governmental authority and the reason for which governments exist? Or are we going to kind of set those aside and kind of establish our own and basically give ourselves a lot more authority and power than God does? And then the question is, once you get to that point, once you make that decision of, hey, we want to do all of these things, then the question becomes, well, how are we going to fund this thing? Because again, governments can only do things. Governments don't produce things on their own. They're not productive. They, under 99% of the circumstances, they actually just take from their people. This is where, oh gosh, it's killing me. It's not Eli. Samuel basically says to the people, or God says to Samuel, like, hey, Samuel, like, these people, the people of Israel wanted to set aside God as being their ruler, and they wanted a king like all the other nations. And Samuel was just bugged by this. Like, it just drove him nuts that these people didn't trust God. They wanted to have this physical representative and stand in for God. And And God just basically says, hey, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And then God, he lays out for them, hey, what's going to be the consequence of you having a king? And I believe it's either 6 or 7 times in a very short span where God says, you're going to have a king. He's going to take your sons. He's going to take some of your crops. He's going to take all these things. And so the emphasis on, the emphasis for official permanent human governance rather than temporary human governance, which is kind of what Israel had experienced up to that point, was that it's going to be a lot more expensive. And the way to fund it is going to be, you're going to have to sacrifice, you're going to have to give resources. And so in the case of all these governments, in the case of specifically fiat currency, the temptation is for governments to rather than actually be upfront and be manly and be courageous and not cowards and go directly to their people and say, hey, we want to do this thing. We think it's in the interest of us as a country and you guys as individuals. And so, but in order to do that, we're going to need to raise taxes. Okay. Instead of doing that, what they do is they say, all right, we're going to change the type of money that we have. We're going to move from a money that has a production cost like silver and gold or other, stone. There's other ways that you can, you can use stones or shells or whatever. We're going to go from having a money that has a production cost, and we're going to move to a money that effectively is not scarce at all. Pieces of paper that have, an image on them that we can effectively create unlimited amounts of, that effectively gives us as gives the governing authorities, gives them effectively unlimited power. It effectively makes them gods. And the problem with that is that sinful people in general, but especially sinful people, are very poor gods. They're very ill-equipped to do a good job in governing as gods. And so that's the temptation, and people just give into this over and over again. They give into the temptation to expand the amount of money that they have, the amount of power that they have, and they do that through illicit means. They go outside of the normal bounds to try to expand their purchasing power, expand their power more broadly. And so, this is something that happens. It's not a new phenomenon. It has happened at a number of different points all throughout human history. It's happened in China a few hundred years ago. And obviously it's happened the world over, over the last couple hundred years. But again, there's just humongous consequences to it that aren't immediately obvious, but are devastating.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the French Revolution.
Yeah.
What ushered that in was the government. I think it was the assignat. That was the name of the currency before. And it was a fiat currency, and they just kept printing. And it just, if you read some of the history, I've not done a deep dive, but I've brushed up on it a little bit. Like it. Yeah. Well, that's where Napoleon rose out of the instability that was
correct.
Possible. I've been playing with a thought recently that has to do with intrinsic value. So you'll often hear people criticize Bitcoin saying, oh, it has no intrinsic value. Gold has intrinsic value. And I just ask, why? So, and you go down this rabbit hole of the myth of intrinsic value. And, because a piece of gold doesn't really have much value if you're stranded on an island.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, this is my opinion, and there's probably holes in my argument here, but I'm working on it, is that only life has intrinsic value. So human life specifically, and then anything else that has life too. Not as much as a human. Humans are sort of the top there in the hierarchy, but animals have life, plants have life, and I think that life is the only thing that has intrinsic value. And what do? We trade our time. We trade time from our life for money so that we can redeem it down the road in the future. And so governments printing money that is in no way, is completely untethered from that. And that's what we're forced to trade our life for, our life energy for. It devalues the only thing that actually has intrinsic value, and we're end up having to trade more of it. And so I don't know. It's just sort of a interesting insight, I think.
Yeah. The way that I have articulated it is, again, just trying to think about, because again, it's one thing to say I'm in this ongoing discussion, debate fight argument with this group of guys who started they're Christian guys who started a cryptocurrency. They call it 1689 coin. It's a reference to the London Baptist Confession, which is one of the confessions of the faith. And so these guys just started this coin. And so the question that they're coming back at me, I'm just basically saying, hey, this is a scam. Like you're literally, this is an affinity scam. You're leveraging, the fact that people understand what the London Baptist Confession is in order to try to extract wealth from them based on this dumb coin that everyone knows is worthless and nobody actually wants. The only reason people are getting involved in this is because they want to make a quick buck. And so, but then I get pushback, which makes sense, right? And people are like, well, who are you to say, what has value and what doesn't have value? And, to quote Doug Wilson, the question that they're asking is like, by what standard? And so this is a fantastic question. It's a question that we haven't had to think a lot about for a very long time, but it's a very valuable and worthwhile question. And so the question is, by what standard is anything right or wrong? Mm-hmm. And humanly speaking, Jesus established, both negatively and positively answers to that question. The negative answer to that question negative answers to those questions would be the 10 Commandments. Okay, you could use that, and so like he tells us what not to do. He tells us what ought not to motivate us, and what we ought not to do in terms of how we treat our. Both our neighbor and God. You've got about half of the commandments that are directed towards humanity's interactions with God, and then another half that are oriented towards humanity's interactions with each other. But stated positively, there's another way that you could phrase that, which is, Jesus is asked, "What's the greatest commandment?" And he basically says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And so the question is, in the case of, we can apply this to monetary creation. So what does it look like? What makes one money more or less moral than another? Well, it has everything to do with, number one, why the money is created, how it's created, and because these questions really do make a big difference. So if your only goal is for a small amount of people to extract as much wealth as possible from their people, well, then you're going to set up society, you're going to set up money, you're going to set up things in a certain way. So in the case of, like, you can think about fiat currencies, right? You have a very small group of people who are the only ones who are legally allowed to print the currency that's backed by nothing. And so what is stopping them from just printing money out of thin air? Like, what is stopping them from doing it? There's really nothing that's stopping them from doing it. And to the contrary, there's actually a huge incentive for them to do it, as like unnoticeably as possible, but they're incentivized to do it because they can give themselves more purchasing power more broadly. And so that's one set of incentives. Now, again, the question is on the other side of things. So that doesn't honor people, right? We can recognize that doesn't honor people. To steal purchasing power from somebody, or to deceive someone into thinking that something is valuable, that has something, into thinking that something has value when it actually doesn't have value. And to only be able to get a monetary benefit from something by taking that value from other people because of this information asymmetry that you have, that doesn't honor and love your neighbor. That's actually hating your neighbor to do that. Beyond that, again, as you mentioned, this principle, the principle of like trying to operate as gods in the world rather than operating as stewards. This is kind of the big difference that's presented all throughout Scripture. Jesus uses this example of the unrighteous steward, and basically an unrighteous steward just basically tries to make himself the king. For the Lord of the Rings fans out there, the steward of Gondor, right? He's designed to just be a placeholder, be a faithful placeholder until the rightful king returns. The rightful king does return, and the steward of Gondor says, "I'm not getting off the throne. I'm not gonna move." And so, Tolkien was a Christian and was very influenced by these ideas as well. And so the question of like, what does it look like? Are we gonna, as it relates to God? So we talked about how things relate to other people, but then in terms of loving God, the question is, are you going to operate as a steward in God's world, or are you going to try to make yourself a king? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we get at is that God, and we understand right from the beginning of the Bible and all throughout the rest of the Scriptures, we see is that this principle of sowing and reaping. God creates this principle and he designs it to be a blessing where, when you reap what you sow. This is a fixed relationship. We see this in agricultural contexts where you plant a seed, and incredibly, you don't just get one apple. You get a tree that produces an abundance of apples. And so it's actually sowing an exponential reaping. It's like this blessing where it's not a one-to-one corresponding relationship between what you get back. It's actually multiplied. You get more than you can ask or think. Like this is the kind of idea that we see applied in spiritual ways and throughout the scriptures as well. So this is something you see, but there's plenty more applications of this than just in agricultural contexts. You have the Apostle Paul talking about sin, and he basically talks about in the end of Galatians, he says that God is not mocked, for what a man sows, that will he also reap. And so the thing that hit me as I was getting into Bitcoin and thinking about money through the lens of the scriptures was just the fact that Paul is saying that God is so hardwired this principle of sowing and reaping into the fabric of the universe that you can't deny that relationship exists without mocking God. It's so obvious that this is how the world operates that you to deny it is to mock God. And so governments who basically turn around and look at their people and say, look, debt is just money we owe ourselves. We can just create money out of thin air, and it's not going to have bad consequences. We can reap where we haven't sown. We can effectively vote ourselves into being gods, and that's not going to have any downstream consequences. We can set aside this idea that God has called us to work. We can set aside the fact that God has given governments to do certain things and not others. We see in the New Testament that governments are supposed to punish evildoers and to reward those who do well. It's a pretty limited explanation of what governments are supposed to do, and yet governments aren't content with that, and so they want to take on more than God has given them, and in doing that, they're actually dishonoring God. They're dishonoring what God has told them to do, and so to create current fiat currencies where it's backed by nothing, it effectively gives them godlike power. This dishonors their neighbor by stealing purchasing power from them over time, and it dishonors God. And so as Christians, we call that sin. This isn't just less than ideal or a big bummer. It's actually sinful and wrong. And so I think, and this is kind of what we've kind of hung our hat on for 3 years, has just been trying to call this out as sinful and call this out as wrong. And tried to adopt much the same posture, not to put us on not to be like self-aggrandizing in importance, but the same idea of, we have examples of this throughout church history. One of them is you have Martin Luther, obviously, where Luther's basically like, hey, this is wrong. The Catholic Church is basically, selling indulgences and doing these kind of things, basically acting like the economy of heaven is just like the economy of earth, where God can be bought off in order to get people out of purgatory sooner and this kind of stuff. And it's an atrocious notion. And so Luther just basically said, hey, this isn't just less than ideal. It's sinful and wrong, and you need to stop it. And we're not going to tolerate this. The other one who I reference all the time is William Wilberforce, who's a British politician who became a Christian at a early 20s, I believe. And then the Lord convicted him about the immorality of the slave trade. The trade of African slaves. And so he ended up working his entire career against the immediate economic interests of the largest empire on earth. And he just went to them and he didn't just go say, hey guys, we can save more money if we just don't do this. He basically says, no, this is immoral and wrong. You're being hypocritical. You call yourselves Christians. We are calling ourselves a Christian country. And yet we are lying about the fact that God has two tiers of people. There's people of one skin color who bear his image. Those are actually more desirable. White skin color is better. And people who have black skin color, they're actually, they're lesser. They don't actually bear the full image of God. And so it's totally okay to enslave them for our own economic benefit. That he took a moral approach. He wasn't a pragmatist. He took a moral approach and did that. And I think you can do the same thing with this case. You can do the same thing with, with Bitcoin and the ethics of money production. You can talk about all these same issues and just basically look at a government and go, hey, this is immoral. Like this, you're just stealing. You're stealing from people in a way that only benefits you politicians and central bankers at the expense of everybody else. And so I just think this is an issue that is, again, like I said, not intuitive, and it just needs people need a lot of time to kind of chew on it and meditate on it. And that's a big part of what Thank God for Bitcoin does.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that explanation. I think every age has something that they have to fight for.
Correct.
Every age. And this, you look around today, there's definitely a lot of things to fight, but a lot of them all have the same root cause, and it's
Correct.
bad money.
Correct.
And, this fighting fiat currency, fighting fiat in general. I mean, selling indulgences, they're selling fiat for people's time and energy. And that, I think that when people study this time period hundreds of years from now, is, they might look at the common thread for all of the unrest, all of the wars, all of the trace roots for a lot of the things that have oppressed people today. Is they're going to say, well, there was this transition from sound money, from hard money to fiat currency. I will readily admit I'm not an expert on any of the, World War I or World War II, but I have studied it enough to notice that there's an interesting correlation of, countries in Europe going off the gold standard, and the economic undertones that were at play. And I've listened to quite a number of people who go deep into this, and it's like, man, this has largely been an economic symptom from detaching ourselves from reality, so to speak. And Bitcoin is sort of like an attempt to return back to these core principles. And I'm glad you brought up sowing and reaping, and so all of that.
Yeah, and that's the reality. Is, again, a lot of people, if they're new, they just hear about Bitcoin for the first time. They're like, oh, this is this super novel thing. It's just too new. It's just too new to be trustworthy and whatever. And there's some truth to that. Like, Bitcoin's only been around for 16 and a half years or whatever. But on top of that, like, Bitcoin, like, it's really, in terms of how it's built, the priorities with which it's built, it's actually this ancient thing disguised as this new technology. It's far more like silver and gold than it is, fiat currencies. And so I just think there's a lot of people who kind of, again, I'm sure there's people who you've talked to, we've all talked to, and maybe who are listening to this, who are like, well, why is this such a big deal? And the reason it's such a big deal is because of what we mentioned earlier, that governments can't do anything unless they can fund it, right? They can't just, like, they have to be able to fund stuff. So public education, why does public education look the way that it does? Why does it, like, who gets to choose the curriculum? Like, who determines what gets funding and what doesn't? Well, the government does. The federal government does, because they give these massive amounts of money. They reward people who do their will, who like basically prioritize the type of education that they value, and they take funding away and withhold funding if you're not willing to play ball with what they want to do. Like, where did this how did the trans and homosexual, like, all these conversations, how did they get to the point in, like, the level of popularity that they did? Is it because there was actually so much free market demand for these things? No. Like, they're being subsidized. A lot of these different messages are being subsidized at high levels by small groups of very powerful people. They have money, or they have relationships with government officials, and they're able to leverage these grievances that they have into large amounts of money designed to change a public opinion about these things, or to do any one of a number of things. You mentioned wars. Like, historically, you go all throughout human history, one of the biggest things that ended wars is that one of the two sides, if not both, would run out of money. And so you can't pay your soldiers, you can't go to war. This is just a reality. And so where you have basically unlimited currency units like we have, you effectively have unlimited war. This is why we've had more war and bigger wars, more ongoing wars for the last 70 years, effectively. And so this, again, has humongous costs. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. And a lot of this would be impossible if it wasn't for, having the money to continue to fight these wars. And again, how are they able to fight these wars? Because the money is just, it's not worth anything. Well, they're able to do it because they're actually stealing value. They're running up deficits. They're running up debt that they're going to leave to our kids and grandkids. And they're basically grabbing that value from the future and pulling it back into the present to be used by them in order to fight all these wars. And so it's a horribly immoral thing. You have in the book of Proverbs, it talks about how a godly man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And so if that's true, and it is, well, then what does that say about us who are leaving mountains of debt to our children's children? It means that we're not righteous. We're unrighteous. And so we need to, like Christians ought to, again, not everyone equally, but like Christians ought to have a problem with this. It ought to bother you that in your name, there are deficits being run up that are going to enshackle your children, your grandkids, and make their lives worse than yours is as a result of these policies. Like it's a horribly immoral thing.
Yeah. And just how much does the Bible talk about debt? I mean,
yeah,
it's just endless.
Well, and this is another big thing, right? Another, like, why does this matter? Why does this whole topic matter? Well, the scripture has a lot to say about debt. It basically talks about debt almost completely negatively. It basically, the borrower slave to the lender. Like that's stated as a fact. There are reasons to go into debt. Like within Israel, they were allowed to sign over their property. They were able to lease it out to somebody for a period of time if they had some emergency, but then they would always get back their property after a certain number of years, so that the family, like the wealth, would effectively stay in the family at least once within a normal lifespan. And so this is like debt is a threat. Debt is something to be afraid of. It's something to be avoided. And what the current system that we're in, where fiat currency actually is debt, the monetary system that we're in, all the currency actually is debt because it's not backed by anything. It's promises to pay back more in the future. And so it's like, really what you're doing is you're turning what God has said, and you're basically turning it completely upside down. And so what you're doing is you're training normal people who don't, as they're coming up behind and they're learning these scriptures, like a kid who's 12 years old or a kid who's 18 years old. He grows up and he reads the verse, a number of verses in the New Testament that say, hey, owe no man anything. Owe no man anything. It could not be more crystal clear. Like that God doesn't want you to have debts. And they read that verse, and then they look at going to college, and they look at trying to get a house, and they look at all these things, and they're like, it's impossible. Like it really is impossible to pay for college and pay $50,000 a year, $70,000 a year, which is another thing that's funded by government subsidies. That this price goes up because of the government can print money to subsidize it. And then, whatever it is, to buy a house. Houses are more unaffordable than they've ever been in the history of the United States. And so you just basically train them. Like, what does this say? You're tempting them. These kind of immoral systems that are set up effectively tempt people to despise and doubt what the scriptures say. It's like, yeah, God tells us not to owe man anything, but I mean, that was then, because really there's no other way in order to operate in the world today if you don't get debt. That's just, so it's this horribly sinister, evil thing to normalize doubting and despising the word of God.
Yeah. You hear people use the terms, oh, well, this is good debt and this is bad debt.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know. And I grew up thinking that, and I actually just don't know if that's true anymore. And you're talking about buying a house, and I'm what came to my mind as you said that was, younger millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
You can see a lot of the pessimism that is, because a lot of Gen Zers, they're starting to, get on Twitter and X and share their opinions a little bit more as they're getting older. And they can't, the pessimism is palpable with Gen Z. And so what do you think about people right now who are 20, 21, 22?
Yeah. Again, there's a real sense in which they have warrant to be angry. It's wrong. Like what's been happening to them. I mean, we talked about this. We just did an episode about Gen Z and home ownership on the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast the other day. And one of the things is just the reality that Yeah, for a lot of people, they're tempted to look around at the situation and just be like, listen, this is hopeless. Like there's no way. The other thing, this is what I was going to mention, is that the only type of debt, or one of the only types of debt that you can't declare bankruptcy on, is student loan debt. Like, think about how immoral that is, right? Mm-hmm. So you take these 17 and 18-year-olds, okay, they don't know anything about how the world works, and basically you're like, hey, we're gonna let you guys take on this, in some cases, $200,000 worth of debt, but you have no recourse. You have to pay this back. Meanwhile, an adult who, just, they get into a horrible financial position, they take on a whole bunch of debt that they can't pay, they can just declare bankruptcy and it goes away. And so, like, it is just, I mean, the whole system is so corrupt and godless and immoral. It's staggering. I can't even believe it is allowed to operate the way that it is. And so a lot of these people in Gen Z, they're looking around and they're like, I'm going to be paying back student loans until the day I die. I'm never going to be able to own a house. I'm never. And so it sows seeds that can produce a lot of bitterness and anger in their hearts. And so the thing that I have and would counsel people is, number one, be angry and don't sin. Okay. You can get angry. You ought to be angry because it's immoral. It's unjust. And yet, like, there's still, even in the face of how awful it is, there are still tons of opportunities, especially if you're in the United States. Like, around the world, things are even worse and it's even harder. But I mean, if you're in the United States, and even if you're a Zoomer or a Gen Alpha, whatever it is, like, there are still tons of opportunities available. I just met with a kid the other day. He goes to my church. He's like 22, 23. And he just basically wanted to talk with somebody and wanted to kind of get perspective on what he's doing, to deal with this kind of stuff and just to try to operate in the world. And so I don't think he went to college, graduated, immediately went to work and started working at a Chick-fil-A. He's like working there. He's like doing a good job. He looks like he's gonna be working his way up into management. And then on top of that, he gets off that job. He works 40 hours a week at that job. When he gets off in the afternoon from that job, he goes and works at a bar in a restaurant that's like right next door. And so he works for another 6-7 hour, whatever. So 4, 5, 6, whatever it is. So he's busting his hump because he recognizes, listen, if I don't work harder, given the situation, listen, I can complain about it all day long, but it's not going to change my situation. And so I would just be, if I was somebody who's Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like, I would try to educate yourself, try to understand, why this is happening, understand Bitcoin, but then find a job that you can actually earn, good cash flows at. Like, you can earn money with, and go that route. And then just, again, save as much money as you can, save in Bitcoin, save in, other scarce goods, because I mean, the reality is there still are opportunities. There's so much money in America. There's so much opportunities in America that, like, again, you are probably connected to somebody who has the resources and has the experience, who can mentor you into being in an even better situation than you're in right now. Like, that's just, yeah. I mean, that's just the reality, statistically speaking.
Yeah. Nothing replaces good old fashioned hard work.
Yeah.
And some of people who their future has been borrowed against. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's just been the story of the 20th century, so to speak. Yep. Is that,
yep.
People in the 1950s, a house cost was equal to the price of their house.
Yep.
And now it's just slowly being extended. The only way to really exit the system, monetarily speaking, is you have to be able to acquire some assets, Bitcoin being the absolute best one, and limiting your costs. Maybe that's living at home. But I mean, really, I'm at the point where I would almost encourage 90% of young people to not go to college.
Yeah. And again, so again, all the mothers, their heads start popping off. No, it's like, what we're not saying, because I feel the same way. Like, what we're not saying is don't go to college. Like, what we're not saying is don't get an education. You have to get an education. But, like, the reality is, especially with so many of these baby boomers, I was just talking to a friend of mine last night. He lives in a small town. It's like between his immediate town is like 2,000 people, pretty rural place. There's another town that's got about 5,000 that's not far away. And he basically said the youngest mechanic in our area is 57 years old. He's like, and I mean, plumbers, a lot of these things, like electricians, there's a shortage of electricians that's insane. Like and so what that means is the electricians who are there are going to be able to print money. They're going to be able to charge literally whatever they want to because they have such a vital service, and there's a shortage of them. There's not enough time in the day for them to do everything. And so I remember I had some of my parents' best friends, their son, he was 17. He was into, I think he was into some form of karate or martial arts of some in some capacity. He went to his parents when he was 17 and basically told them that he didn't want to go to college and that he wanted to go to like a VOTEC school. And so what he did was he was still 17 or 18. He graduated high school, and whatever school he was at, the VOTEC training, vocational, skill school that he was interested in, they came to his school. They set up like a backdrop, like they have for like signing day for, college football, players who are going to go decide to go play for a different school. They set up this background, and he signed a contract at 17 years old to start making, from the very beginning, okay, to be making $75,000 a year, learning, I believe it was welding. And so the least this dude is ever going to make is 75 grand right off the bat. And so just the contrast of so many of his friends who are just like, they've been told their whole life, you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. So they go and load up on debt that they can't declare bankruptcy on. They're going to be paying it until the cows come home. They're going to do that. And then he's making 75 grand right out the gate. He's going to end up with a skill that he can do for the rest of his life anywhere in the world. He can generate cash flow if he needs to. He's going to be able to pay for his own college if he wants to do that. He can piecemeal and take certain courses that he really thinks, hey, this will benefit me. This will give me more opportunity. It just gives you a flexibility and just keeps you from being shackled and like enslaved to a system and to a set of payments that you're going to be, hung around your neck for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And just the quicker people, let me just start by saying, I'm happy we have child labor laws. I'm happy about that. Right. But
I'm not. No, I'm just kidding.
But teenagers can work, man.
Yeah, man.
They can work. And the maturity that they're going to acquire through that process is
Correct.
so beneficial. Imagine
Correct.
if that was the norm across the whole entire country. We wouldn't be having 24-year-olds who for the first time are starting to work. Like,
yep.
I was reading a book about Charles Lindbergh, and his autobiography, and he's talking about his dad. And his dad, his parents died at like really young age, and he would have to go out by himself and hunt a deer.
Yeah.
At the age of 8 or 9 and bring it home by himself.
We're so soft. It's mind-blowing.
But he just had to do it. That was the conditions of life at that time.
Yep.
Made it possible for him to do something like that. And so it's not a stretch. Is that good? Is that bad? You can have the discussion, but 15, 16-year-olds should be working.
Yeah, you can say that industrial scale child labor is not good. Like, no one is going to disagree with you. But to act like you can't, and again, no one's actually saying that. Like, it's not like you can't have your kids work for your company. Like, of course you can. Like, you can do that. You can pay your kids to work for you, and actually, there's tax incentives to do so. Like, you can actually pay your kids well, and then just have like a tax advantaged way to to maintain more of your income, which is something you should be interested in doing regardless. But like, yeah, I mean that's one of these things. Now again, on the other hand, like if you're sitting here, like we're not saying, all right, sir, force our kids to all go work menial labor. Like, okay, hey, mate, listen, you don't even like. We're not saying you have to do that. Like, if you want to be like as plugged in as humanly possible, literally, there are YouTube channels where guys literally take a weed whacker and take a lawnmower and go video themselves mowing lawns.
Yes.
And they get hundreds of thousands of views that generate tens of thousands of dollars. Like, it is so absurd right now. There's such a lack of labor that people find actual manual labor interesting to watch.
Yeah, isn't it funny?
Like, it's crazy.
It's really funny that people want to watch other people work. I've seen a lot of those videos.
Yeah. Oh, I've watched them too. Yeah.
Like, man, this guy just in 2 hours he made this lawn which was totally overgrown with weeds and it looked disgusting. And And it's just fascinating. Meanwhile, look at all the weeds I have in my lawn, my driveway, and I'm like,
Yep.
I got to go. I should probably go do that. I could
Yep.
literally do what this guy's doing in this video, and
Yeah.
I, and that's his niche, obviously. But
Yeah.
it's just so interesting. I mean,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
know we're running. I have 2 more questions,
do it. Go for it.
and we'll start to wrap up here. I don't want to take too much of your time. We'll skip one of them because, man, you read my mind. The tweet I wanted to read was this one.
Oh,
The willingness of Christians to profit off of cryptocurrencies they know are worthless truly disgusts me. They're hating their neighbor and denying the Lord who bought them.
Yep.
You touched on this a little bit, and with the 1689 coin.
Yep.
But is there any, maybe go a little broader? Do you think this way with every other altcoin and things like that, pretty much?
Yeah. Again, in a word, yes. Like in a word, yeah. Like especially I would say this especially applies to people who are organizing these projects, because like there are like I'm not like the average person who doesn't understand any of these things. They don't they're thinking about this like it's just stocks or whatever. Like I have no problem with those people. Like that's not, again, it's similar to like the spiritual thing where Jesus, he didn't go hard. Like Jesus went super hard at the Pharisees. He went hard at them because they were supposed to be like, they were the teachers. They were the people who like, they were going with eyes open as to what they're doing. And like, they were knowingly like doing things that were immoral. Like they were setting up systems in ways that were immoral. And so Jesus went really hard at them. And so with this 6989 thing, like I've gone hard at them because I think, again, they deserve it. I think it's ridiculous what they're doing. I think there's no value to this project. It's going to be worthless in a few years. And the only people like, again, them and a number of other people who are in this project have the opportunity to just completely rug pull, and make a lot of money for nothing. And so I actually had another tweet. I'm trying to find, it was within the last like week or so, but it's basically something to the effect of, what is it? Basically trying to get the desire to get something for nothing is demonic. The desire to give something that costs you everything is divine. Like literally as a Christian, like the example left by our Lord is someone who leaves heaven in a way that inconveniences him completely. It costs him everything. He has to give up. He actually has to give up something of more value than any life that's ever existed. He lays down his life. He leaves his Father and he goes down to the earth and he suffers and dies for us in order to give us what is true wealth, which is fellowship and intimacy with his Father. That's what he does. He sacrifices in order to give us something of enormous value, untold value. And all of these altcoin projects, and this could be, there's plenty of scam businesses that this applies to, but like to basically look at, like a lot of these projects, they look at people as like literal oranges full of juice to be expressed. Like really, you don't care about these people at all. All you want is the money that they have. You want to separate them from their money, and you want to get their money in exchange for this thing that is just of no value. And so like I said this to somebody the other day. I was like, I could literally have a net worth of $100 million. Like I could easily have done, I could have sold out, scammed, done all these cryptocurrencies, all these, meme coin, all these other things in 2019 when I first got in. I could have done all of these things and made a ton of money. I could also go out and leverage my position and create TGFB coin and make tons of money through this if I was willing to sacrifice, if I was willing to just basically prioritize my own monetary benefit over against the actual interests of real people out in the world. And I'm just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to do it. And again, that's because the Lord has given me new desires. And like, this is not something like, oh, look, pat on my back. It's just like, it's similar to, and I've thought about this like biblically, you have David, right? David wants to build the temple. And so David is like looking for a piece of property on which to build the temple. He finds one that he wants to buy. And so he goes to the guy who owns the property, and the guy says, wait, what are you going to use it for? And David goes, well, I want to build the temple here. And the guy goes, well, let me give it to you. I want to give it to you. I want to give you I would just want to give it to the Lord. And David looks at him and goes, no, I don't want to give to the Lord that which costs me nothing. Like David didn't want to get something for nothing. That didn't, like, he recognized, like, there's a value in this thing costing me something. Like this thing that I'm giving to the Lord, it ought to cost me. Like it would be lying about, it wouldn't be honoring the Lord if I were just to accept this thing as a free gift, which ironically is contrasted with salvation, which is a free gift. And so the other side of this too is you have, and I feel like this example is even more germane to this particular situation, is with Abraham, right? So Abraham, his nephew Lot gets taken captive, along with the king of Sodom and Gomorrah and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and some of these other places. And so Abraham hears that his nephew Lot and these other guys who are obviously Sodom and Gomorrah, we know that they're not good places. And so Abraham risks his life with his mighty men, and they go off and they fight these other armies who defeated them. And Abraham, warlord, goes out there, defeats them all. And then the question is, he sets the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, all these other guys, he sets them free. And the question arises of what they're going to do with the spoils of war. And so, what happens in this story, and I've got like a piece that I wrote on this. What happens is that the king of Sodom pipes up, and he goes, "Hey, here's what we'll do. You take some of the gold. You take some of the, these other things. Let me keep some of the prisoners, and then we'll call it even." And so, that to Abraham, just think about it. If Abraham is only thinking about himself, if he's only thinking about enriching himself, I mean, he actually has a good case for actually doing that, right? Because he's basically saying, Abraham risked his life. He risked the life of all these men who worked for him. Abraham could have died, and he rescued all of their life. They owed their entire lives to him. And yet Abraham's answer is super interesting. Abraham looks at them and goes, and he says to them, lest you be able to say, he basically says, I'm not going to take a sandal from you. I'm not going to take anything from you, lest you say, I have made Abraham rich. Lest you be able to say, I made Abraham rich. And so that's what's really interesting is what's going on there. There's this power dynamic where the king of Sodom and Gomorrah have just been embarrassed in front of everyone. They got shown to be weak militarily. They needed someone else to come rescue them and save them. They're not used to being in that position. And so to try to reverse the power dynamics, the king of Sodom goes, oh, look, we'll be generous and we'll give you some of the spoils of war. And Abraham goes, nope, I'm not going to let you pay that debt. I'm not going to let you put me in your debt. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to let you say that you made Abraham rich. And that's what I'm describing here is you could not pay me $1 billion. You couldn't pay me $1 billion to take one of these garbage coins and enrich myself because I'm not going to do it. It's not worth it to me. Okay. I don't want to be able to say, I can honestly say with a clean conscience, I did mess around with altcoins when I first got into these things. I literally only lost money in them. I only lost money. So I can just hand to the Lord, say, I only lost money in these things. And so again, until people start to value their own integrity and start to value, until they take seriously that, there's some things that where the cost is too high. There's some wealth where the cost is too high. We have OnlyFans, all these OnlyFans models, they're willing to sell their bodies in order to get money in return. They're basically saying, hey, I'm willing to trade my dignity to get short-term monetary benefit. Yes, I'm going to leave a legacy of these videos living forever on the internet for my kids and grandkids to be able to see me, whatever, but they're willing to do it. And so this type of thinking that is in part a symptom of broken money is still reprehensible, and still you should be willing to say, hey, I'd rather be poor. I'd rather be, again, and David talks about this too. I'd rather be, it's better to be poor with integrity than rich with, whatever it is. I can't remember the exact wording.
Better is a little with righteousness than great multitudes with, I know.
You know what I'm saying. So that's just one of these things where hey, Christians, we haven't gotten a lot of good ethical teaching in how to process a lot of these things. We need to get more. We need to get better at it, because the consequences are we have plenty of wicked people who can turn around and basically point out that, hey, how are you going to object to this? Don't you give money don't you benefit from these things? And it's like, nope, I'm not going to. I don't want to play your game. I'd rather be poor than play your dumb game and just boast in how much money I made off of idiots, which is effectively what meme coins do. I'm just not going to do it.
Really well put. I could not agree more. Last question. We talked about debt and just the mountains of debt that we're accruing, borrowing from the future. It's almost like 36, almost $38 trillion of debt. Like, you can't even really imagine a number that big.
Yep.
Our minds are not capable of it.
Yep.
Looking at the gospel and the debt that we've accrued, how does, you were a Christian before you were a Bitcoiner. And being a Christian is infinitely more important, where your soul ends up, that question. But understanding this debt from a new facet, from this new angle, having studied monetary theory and all that, how has that, because sometimes when you hear a new analogy, it just colors in something a little different. So how does it color in your appreciation or shape your view of the debt that Christ paid and it's wiped out and he actually has the value to pay it with?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that question, but I think it is profound and it's like moving. I'm like, who's cutting onions around here? But like, it is moving because when you think about if you have debt in the context of scarce currency, the way to pay off the debt, there's no easy way to go find more money. Like if you have currency of gold and silver, the only way to pay that off is to go work and get it from somebody else, or potentially, again, get extraordinarily lucky and find some more of it somewhere. But again, in the worst case scenario, like some of these parables that you have where these guys, because of the debt that they have, they get locked up. There's like debtors' prisons. And so you're like, how am I ever going to pay this debt? And so whereas the kind of context that we're in, like debt is trivialized. We're just like, debt's like, it's not ideal, but like, it's not that big of a deal, especially again, with you can just declare bankruptcy. Like it trivializes debt. That's the effect that it has. And so to think about when Jesus is talking about debt and like, he's talking about sin as though it's a debt, like it really is profound. Like this is an actual scarce, it's a scarce debt that we're talking about. This is a scarce context. And so it really does heighten the value of it. It does heighten how moved we ought to be, and it heightens the stakes in ways that our current context and current culture doesn't. And so, yeah, I do think that we can't just take for granted and just the word would be like eisegesis these things that we read, like eisegesis is like reading meaning into. So it's basically you read your own context into, something that you're reading, some document from 100 years ago. So, if you're reading a book from 50 years ago and it talks about how people had a gay old time, right? Like they're not talking about a homosexual time. They're talking about like a happy time. And so it's a similar thing. Like the debt that is described in the scriptures it's not the kind of debt that we deal with. It's different. And those differences matter. And we ought to think about and reflect more on just how meaningful those differences are.
Yeah. It's a debt with which we don't have a single coin of the currency to pay it back. And, think of the national debt, like that's a collective debt that like everybody's gonna have to pay the consequences for. But like on this spiritual side with sin, it's each individual has that same, it's insurmountable, the amount. And Jesus is the only one who is able to pay that debt with his precious blood. And so I think that's a good note to sort of end on. And it's great to process it out loud, and to communicate that, because it helps it penetrate just a little bit deeper in my own heart. So I have 2 of your books here. This one, Thank God for Bitcoin. This is a little bit older, but then you have a new one called The Gospel According to Bitcoin, 21 Meditations. And this is also great because, I'm reading through it. I'm not reading it in order,
Yep.
but it is great. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, um, you know, Bitcoin cannot save your soul, but
Thank you for clarifying.
yeah,
Yes.
um, there's a lot of profound concepts that, yeah, I don't know. What would you say about it?
Yeah, what I would say is, so Jesus turns to money like as one of his frequent places to talk about parables, to like
Yeah.
to explain spiritual truth. He frequently turns to money to basically explain spiritual realities. And so Bitcoin is just money. And so we do the same thing in that book. So whereas Thank God for Bitcoin was designed to explain Bitcoin to Christians. Like
Mhm.
explain the why more than just the how. It's not a super technical book at all. It's written at like a ninth grade level, and it just explains the why. Like, why do these things matter? Why should Christians care about these things? Whereas the Gospel According to Bitcoin was more of an evangelistic book. It's designed to explain to people who already value Bitcoin, why money exists, and a lot of just to communicate spiritual truths using something that they already value.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm just thinking like it's people get tripped up by the title. It's like semi frustrating to me. I'm like, literally, like John MacArthur wrote a book called The Gospel According to Jesus. It's one of the most common gimmicks on Amazon. If you search the gospel according to whatever, like this, it's a super common little gimmick as a way to do this. What we're not saying is that Bitcoin is the good news. Like, it's not that at all. It's basically saying, hey, you can communicate the message of the gospel in monetary terms. And there's a lot of ways in which you can do this specifically with Bitcoin based on how it works, the priority, the incentive structure that it creates.
It's a vehicle through which you can deliver a message, and people do that with different things all the time.
Exactly. Yep.
People just feel weird about money in today's day and age, and
especially digital money, Bitcoin, because it's digital money and it's new, and it just weirds people out.
Magic internet money. Well, I'm going to put the links to both of these books, and people should definitely buy them and support you. And I just really want to thank you for your time. Do you have any conferences or speaking engagements that you're going to be at this for the remainder of 2025?
Yeah, so I'll be at the Bitcoin for Everyone conference in Portland next week. Are you gonna be at that one?
I might now, because I'm only.
Oh, let's go. Okay, yeah. So maybe we'll see you there.
Yeah.
I've got a buddy named Ashua and a buddy named Ryan, who are both going to be speaking. And then beyond that, I'm trying to think, where else am I going to be? I am going to be somewhere. We're doing a trip to India with a bunch of missionaries and other people. We're going to be going to do that later this fall. Our next thing, it looks like, is going to be a conference, basically joining with BitBlock Boom, the BitBlock Boom conference, which is going to be, I believe it's in Fort Worth or Dallas. It's going to be in April of this coming year. So we don't have our tickets up yet. We're going to have those up shortly. So we're going to be doing that. And then, well, the only other thing that I forgot to mention, which was the other book that I just finished, which is our kids book. It's our first kids book. Just designed to explain Bitcoin in an indirect way. We don't use the B word at all, but that one's called The Orange Umbrella, and that'll be available soon. So
awesome. Can't wait. Yeah. And I'll put information where people can find all those things. And yeah, maybe we'll see you in Portland. I wanted to go to that conference last year. Couldn't make it happen, but maybe this is the year. And so, Jordan, thank you so much for your time.
Yep.
Thank you for the work that you do and joining me today, man.
Matthew, appreciate you, brother.
Have a good one.
You too.